So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to the second battle in the episodic series that was sent to me by Flame of Arnor. And I've decided retroactively, these battles are not going to be coming out for a couple of weeks yet anyway, so this is something that I will be doing in the other one as well, even though I don't mention it in the first part, and that is I'm going to be posting Flame of Arnor's descriptions of the battles in the descriptions of the videos as well, because I feel as though they get across the narrative a little bit better than I could, without any sort of dedicated cinematic intros at the very least. And it also gives me a little bit more time to focus on the sort of thing that I usually do, which is the battle itself and the mechanics of which. But regardless, the story does continue, and this time we are going to be seeing a bit of a tragic sight really, because the Dwarves are going to be attacking into the forces of Dale, which of course last time out we were mentioning that they were going to be heading to the aid of the elves of Mirkwood, as the Dwarves have decided to throw in their lot with the Easterlings post-victory in the War of the Ring, which is a bit of a sad outcome on the part of the Dwarves really, to ruin the victory that people have worked so hard for. This is also a much quicker battle in many ways. It's a bit of a palate cleanser in some ways, considering all of the really long siege battles that we've been doing seemingly for about a month now, kind of without pause. So this is a little bit different, and this does act as obviously the middle point in this little episodic series anyway. And this is also, unlike the previous battle that we saw, while it did have a part of a familiar map on it, with Thranduil's halls lurking at the back, it was intended to be a little bit different than the standard variant of that map. This one, on the other hand, is a map that we have seen several times before. This is, of course, the Iron Hills, albeit I think geographically this isn't intended to be the Iron Hills for the purposes of this battle, but it is a pretty good open, not so much a siege map, because it's more of a field map than anything else, but it is a field map where one of the teams certainly has got a better defensive position than the other, and on that occasion that is going to be Dale, because 3 armies of Erebor are going to be attacking into them, so it's going to be pretty difficult for Dale, and generally speaking. I think this matchup, especially with the numbers advantage that they have, the openness of the field, Dale's strengths relative to Erebor's, I think Erebor, generally speaking, would be considered to be the favourites for this map, in my opinion, given that Dale's strength and depth in terms of defensive archers doesn't really do them too many favours against their traditional allies in the Dwarves, but we shall see. Here, Toby Larone. So we'll go through the attackers first and foremost, of course. Toby Larone, as we saw in the last battle replay, I have no idea actually how he did in that battle replay, because I'm going to be recording all of the intros all in one go after a day's work, and then I'm going to be recording the actual battles this coming weekend, so it's a little bit different to how I usually do things, but we'll see how it goes. It might be something that I adopt moving forwards if it works out well and eases the burden a little bit. He's going to be playing as Erebor, as I've said, Ironfoot Wargoats, so something that these scenarios / battle replays have already shown me is the fact that these armies are not shy of using the cavalry units that are non-bodyguard units, which with the current state of Reforged, they're not the most effective or efficient units to use, generally speaking, but it is neat to see them, because you don't really get to see them outside of these situations. Most players that are in the know kind of know that they're not really worth bringing the vast majority of the time. A couple of units of Ironfoot Wargoats. I mean, this is a problem potentially for Dale if they can't use their defensive cavalry to screen. Something like this could be used to great effect to do a lot of damage to that core of Dale, especially their archers. They do need to be a little bit careful. Then we have some Ironfoot warriors. This is where Dale are going to struggle a little bit, because obviously the Dwarves are going to have more strength and depth with regards to their heavy infantry. While Dale do have a few tools that they can use against the Dwarves in melee, generally speaking, it's going to be the stunted folk that are going to have the significant edge in melee, especially when it comes to their numbers. They are going to have to rely a little bit more maybe on their rank and file units like these Ironfoot warriors, but that should still be enough to give them the edge in melee, especially if they're backed up by just that little bit of quality. It'll make life a little bit more difficult for the Northman. But yeah, 4 units of the Ironfoot Warriors. They're also going to be backed up by a handful of units, 3 units of the Ironfoot Halberdiers. Dale do have access to a pike unit which can outrange them, but it is a lower tier unit of pikes. Dale's upper end unit of polearms is a fellow halberd unit, so it's a bit more of an even fight between these Ironfoot halberds and the Barding Herd. I'd still maybe give the slight edge one-on-one to the Barding Herd on that in that particular matchup. But it's all about the combined package for the Dwarves here, and obviously that armor-piercing phalanx is going to be of great use to them when it comes to really hammering home the traditional infantry advantage they have, because most of Dale's scarier infantry units, of course, much like the Dwarves themselves, pack on the armour. It's very likely, of course, that Dale actually acquired their armour via trade with the Dwarves, so that's something worth considering. And then a couple of units of Axguard of Erebor, which of course even more armour piercing, albeit in a more direct fashion here with this more of a traditional shock infantry unit. This very, very dangerous to the likes of the Earls, even stuff like the Barding Herd if you can find a way to circumvent the frontal phalanx. Could be a real problem for Dale to have to try and deal with, but from the looks of things there is no dedicated bodyguard unit, which is somewhat interesting. His general's going to be in the Ironfoot Wargoats, so they can't rely on the traditional dwarven thing, which is what we often see when players are allowed to pick their own armies, which is get 1 or 2 or even 3 bodyguard tier units. It gives you a small army, but it gives you such a core of quality that it can be really difficult for your opponents to outmuscle you in that regard. But perhaps we'll see some bodyguard units from the other players, starting off with Ankles, which is a rather interesting name. The second Erebor army. He's got another unit of Wargoats, so plenty of mobility here from the Dwarves, which will serve them well on a rather large map like this, especially seeing as this is a rather short battle. So you can guarantee that we're going to get down to business pretty quickly. We also have some Ironfoot crossbowman over here. This is another problem that Dale have to try and deal with, because skirmishing with a unit like this isn't the easiest. That dwarven armour and those shields they wear on their back make it difficult for regular archers to kill them quickly enough before they get at least a few decent volleys off. And a few decent volleys from these units of crossbows could be all you need to do some pretty significant damage to the core of Dale's army. Going to be backed up by the Ironfoot spears. They're going to be less effective in melee against Dale's infantry than the Ironfoot warriors are, certainly on the offense anyway. The Ironfoot spears do offer a little bit more rigidity to your front line, but against the upper tier Dalian units, this is a matchup that Dale would prefer compared to the Ironfoot warriors, I think, because the slower pace at which spears deal damage will perhaps suit the way that Dale wants to approach this, or the way I would imagine they'd like to approach this. But there is still the problem of actually managing to kill these spears off without either wasting your ammo. It's going to be an interesting one, and there are still some Ironfoot warriors here anyway, a couple of units of them. He does have a traditional bodyguard unit of the Dwarves, the Highborns of Erebor. They are the upper end, more defensive bodyguard unit that Erebor have. They're effectively the equivalent of the Mithril Guard that Khazad-Dum have. They may not be quite as impressive in that regard, but they are still the more defensive of the bodyguard units that Erebor can field, whereas the Dragon Slayers are the more aggressive overall. Maybe Legion Bodyguard would be a better comparison for the Highborns. More Ironfoot Wargoats, so another unit of fast-moving cavalry, another unit of Ironfoot warriors, and another unit of Axguard, so plenty of armour piercing on display here for the attackers thus far. And finally we have the Flame of Arnor himself, who sent me these battle replays and gave me the stories to them. He is also playing Erebor, of course. Ironfoot Wargoats. He has got some Ironfoot warriors, some Ironfoot spears, so lots of rank and file units, also some crossbows. He's closest to one of the Dalian armies right across from him, but Dale are also rather split up, but more on that in just a moment. Another unit of crossbows, more spears, more Axguard of Erebor, Ironfoot Wargoats, warriors and Wargoats. So more similar perhaps to the Erebor army on the other side, where there's nothing really outstanding like the Highborns perhaps, but there's still enough quality here, combined with the army of Ankles over there in the middle, that this army of Dale could end up in a little bit of trouble if he's not careful. And Dale are also split up, like I just mentioned. It'll be interesting to see whether Farkin over here and his reinforcing army, Supreme Noob God, can actually support one another, because if they can't stand from a sure place together, then the Dwarves should be able to pick them apart. But the problem Farkin has is I think he needs to be able to engage with the Dwarves pretty quickly. We'll see how well that goes. I mean, the Dalian cavalry here is very fast. It should be able to run rings around the Wargoats. The problem is the Wargoats and their solidity are going to be able to override the Dalian cavalry if it comes down to a melee fight. It's a bit of a different proposition when it comes to the Earls of Dale here, because they are melee cavalry, so if they can avoid the Wargoats' charge, especially with 2 units of them, it could be a little bit problematic for the Flame of Arnor alone to deal with this cavalry force, with 2 units of more aggressive but lightweight lancers and then 2 units of melee cavalry to screen. The problem that Dale may have is the close proximity of the cavalry that Ankles can provide as well. We shall have to wait and see. Lots of units of Dalian spearmen, so they're going to be filling the same role really that the Ironfoot spears are going to be, being that defensive bulwark for Dale. They're going to provide a valuable service, but they aren't going to be the reason that Dale are going to win any melee fights. They're just going to be the reason that Dale can keep their lines together. Defensively good, but ultimately they're not going to have the damage needed to crack through that dwarven plate armour. Dale are going to have to rely on other units to do so. One unit that will be better at doing that, they're not armour piercing, but the Dismounted Earls of Dale are a good quality line infantry unit. And actually, the Dwarves don't have their upper end unit of line infantry, the Erebor Legionaries, that would be able to defeat them 1-to-1 as a similar type of unit. Having said that, there are plenty of Ironfoot halberdiers on the field. The Axe Guard of Erebor are also fairly ideally suited for taking on a unit like the Earls of Dale, but it's a good quality unit which, considering the compositions are what they are, the sort of thing that Dale perhaps can rely upon to do some good work in melee. Either side of 3 units of Barding Herd as well, so Flame of Arnor of all the Erebor armies has probably got the worst matchup to Farkin's, given that he doesn't really have any polearm. Stuff like the Ironfoot Spears and Warriors not going to enjoy going up against the Lamella-clad Barding Herd, but again, there's another army of Erebor right there which can come to their aid pretty quickly. Only 1 unit of Bardian Marksmen as well, which is odd for Dale. There's not leaning, at least this army is not leaning into its archers as much as is traditional. Again, a single unit of Bardian Marksmen. They do have the armour upgrade, which will help them, especially, well, more so in melee, but the problem is those crossbows may well give Erebor a significant ranged advantage here, which is going to encourage Farkin maybe to advance forward aggressively, but that could be a trap in the long run. And then his general is going to be in the Dalian Royal Guard. Nice unit of defensive archers as well, very good in melee when they pull out their long swords. We'll have to wait and see. It's going to be a difficult task for Farkin to be sure, but even if he can deal significant damage to these 2 armies, perhaps the defensive position that this Dalian player has up here may be enough. We'll have to wait and see. His cavalry, Dalian cavalry, Earls of Dale once again. I think it's the same setup over here. Yes, indeed. 2 of the Lancers, 2 of the melee cavalry. I mean, these units could cross the gap that's between the 2 players fairly quickly. Whether it would come in time to bail the Dalian army on the flat over on the other side of the map out, I'm not sure. But it's worth a go, honestly, because you may as well. Like, if you keep this cavalry bottled up on the hill, it's going to do you no favours in the long run. Dalian Spearmen, once again, interestingly enough, we've got some Lake Town infantry, lightweight archers that don't have too much ammunition. They double as light infantry. Nice multifaceted unit. They're more useful, I would say, if they're the attackers in a situation like this. They're really going to struggle to do much damage to the Dwarves both at range and in melee, but you've got to make do with what you're given, so we'll wait and see if the Lake Town infantry can be useful in that regard. Dalian Spearmen, plenty of Barding Herd. It's also got some Lumbermen that have revealed themselves. I mean, they may be a very basic unit, but the armour piercing is still exactly what you want when you're facing off against the Dwarves. 2 units of Dalian Spearmen, another unit of Lake Town infantry. And finally, the unit that Dale have, which the Dwarves will rightly fear in melee, and that's the Dalian Paladins, Great Mace infantry. Again, a very scary unit of bodyguard tier armour piercing shock troops. 1 versus 1, they might actually be the most dangerous unit of infantry on the field. I mean, when you compare them to the Highborns, the armour piercing gives them that extra bit of offensive might that would make them victorious in any 1v1. I don't know. I mean, it's going to be difficult, this one, for Dale. By its very nature, they're split up. We'll have to wait and see. I think Erebor should win this based on how things are set, but there are some good quality units for Dale. They can't rely on their usual strength, which is archers. They're going to have to rely a little bit more on things that they don't traditionally do very well, which is, I would say, cavalry. Their infantry corps is decent. They're going to be reliant on the Barding Herd there, but yeah, without further ado, let's begin, shall we? So it does look as though Dale are going to be waving off and trying to regroup with their allies. Whether they will be allowed to or not by Erebor remains to be seen, because if Erebor can collapse down on this singular Dalian army, as I've said in the intro a few times, I really don't think Dale are going to be able to fight their way out of this situation when it comes to infantry. They're going to be hopelessly outclassed in this kind of matchup, even though they are going to have slightly more quality per army. When you're faced with 3 Dwarven armies like this, it's always going to be quite difficult, their core of Ironfoot units being very, very reliable. Dale have got some very nice infantry units, but overall, they're going to have to rely on other things if they are going to try and defeat the Dwarves. And I do like that Dale is actually going to try and link their 2 armies together, and that Supreme Noob God over here is not simply going to wait for his allies' doom to come upon him, and is going to advance down off these hills. This does mean that they're effectively surrendering a good bit of terrain to try and fight the Dwarves on more equal footing, which maybe isn't a good thing in the long run, but it does mean that at least you don't lose the battle in the short run with almost instantaneous effect as the rain starts to pour here in the northern hills. I have no idea why there's slight frame juddering, but it's something that's been happening a little bit with a bit more frequency lately, which might be another sign of potential hardware issues. But again, that's something to talk about another day. Earls of Dale are going to be effectively acting as the screen, so that the Dwarves cannot simply come forward with their cavalry. Those Ironfoot Wargoats are a bit of a danger after all, but the Earls of Dale make for a very good screen. Melee cavalry, decent melee cavalry for their tier as well. Dalian cavalry moving as well, but both Dalian armies are going to find themselves in the centre of the map. They could go right up the hill again. It looks as though Erebor have been told to give them a little bit of a moment's grace to allow Dale to get into position a little bit more, but there's no sense in me really making too much of a cut because it's not an extremely long battle. Both of the two battles either side of this one in the episodic series are more large-scale sieges. This is more of a bridge between the two of them. Dale setting up a bit of a front line here. Now this is the unit, as I've said, that I think Dale are going to have to depend upon to win this battle if they are going to be able to manage that, which is the Barding Herd. Very effective unit of halberdiers. That armour piercing is going to be absolutely vital for cracking through the dwarven armour that they're going to be bringing to the field today, especially in the absence of a lot of Dale's other potential tools they could use, mainly being Blackshot Dragon Slayers, but their army overall here is somewhat lacking in archers, as I've already mentioned. Plenty of lumbermen over here though, which is something of an interesting inclusion. They're not going to last very long against the dwarves, but that armour piercing might be exactly what they need. And they're going to need to be used at exactly the right time as well. Let's go and have a look at what the dwarves are doing, because they are taking their time getting into position. This is probably going to be a very fast and very violent affair. This would be the sort of thing which would worry me if I were the Dalians, honestly. These Ironfoot crossbowmen, especially seeing as they don't really have a huge amount of archers with which to respond to this with. The Erebor crossbows could march into range and then simply bombard the Dalian front line at will. Ironfoot Wargoat starting to move this way as well. Highborns of Erebor actually leading the way. It's interesting because they are a little bit exposed. I mean, there are spears nearby, but it might be worth a cheeky charge or two with a unit of Dalian cavalry just to try and assassinate that dwarven general. Their armour does... well, their morale does tend to be enough in most cases. What's going on over here? This, I would say, is a bit of a serious misstep. I assume that Flame of Arnor is not going to punish that. For the sake of the battle actually being somewhat interesting, because again, exposing your Dalian paladins like that just to keep your general out of harm's way is definitely not worth it when you've got Ironfoot Wargoats around waiting effectively to charge into the enemy. Dwarves, and again the dwarves actually do have a bit of a terrain bonus. They could go all the way around, but I think they're probably not going to do that. Instead, Dale effectively fighting back to back, which is fairly intriguing. As Lake Town infantry, so they're going to be able to shoot with their basic bowmen as the dwarves move forward. How much damage that's going to do remains to be seen. Probably not all that much. If they can target down something like the Ironfoot halberdiers who are at least unshielded, that may be the way to go. It'll also give a little bit more breathing room to your own phalanx units. And in a battle like this, which is probably going to be constrained to within this valley, I'm interested to see how all this cavalry works. I don't know if it's going to be all that useful for either side, to be honest. Maybe slightly more so for Dale if they can actually escape with a couple of units of Dalian cavalry, start hammer and anviling the dwarves when they really commit. I mean, there is a time limit on this fight, so the dwarves don't have all day. They are going to have to move forward and be aggressive at some stage. Farkin has already set up his archers to maybe act as a bit of a deterrent to those crossbows from moving forward completely unhindered. On the other side, the Dalian cavalry going to charge in. Not sure I'd recommend it now. Maybe when that unit of highborns were exposed, but now that the dwarves are a little bit more prepared, their own wargoats are ready, there are halberds close by as well. And as I said, this could be a real useful unit to have in the late game if they can preserve their strength somewhat, but I don't know. Dalian paladins. Are they going to charge forward? It looks like they are, so we are going to see the first bloodshed on the field today as two units of cavalry charge into one another. You can see the mass there of the dwarven cavalry really pushing the Dalian cav back. This is a fight that 1v1 the dwarves should win in just a straight up melee engagement. With two units of Dalian cavalry it becomes a little bit more questionable, but you can see here the lightweight nature of the Dalian lancers is working against them. And certainly I think the Earls of Dale would have been a much better choice there. They still would have been pushed backwards a little bit on the initial charge, but in melee they would have been far better prepared to deal with this kind of foe, and the dwarves already working up a bit of a lead. Infantry over there. You can see once again they're making the same mistake really, sending the Dalian cavalry in effectively to be slaughtered. This is where the dwarven general is. You might get lucky and kill off Toby Larone's general, but it's not worth throwing this amount of lancers under the bus for. Are you going to be able to shoot with your Lake Town infantry? The Dalian cavalry is now pulling back. The heavy-duty nature of the dwarves really helping them out there. Earls just in behind. What are you going to see here then? Ironfoot spears moving forward. Just a few probing assaults first and foremost. These Ironfoot spears are not going to be enough to break through the Dalian front line. Those halberds in behind the spears, and just the sheer numbers of this front line is going to be too much. And this is the sort of break which maybe Dale need. They need to start thinning out the dwarven herd a little bit. And now the Dalian Rearguard also firing away. This, of course, is a significant worry for the dwarves, or for Dale, I should say. It's a boom for the dwarves. These crossbow bolts, Dalian archers trying to respond in kind. I would imagine one of the units of crossbows is probably going to try and counter-skirmish with the Dalian Rearguard. Another one I would recommend trying to shoot into this Dalian front line. There's a chaotic fight going on over here as still the cavalry trades blows with one another, and it still looks as though Dale is very heavily on the back foot. It goes to show what having lighter single HP lancers like that, they really don't do too well when you start talking about heavier units. Even though the Wargoats are not multiple HP, they're still much more robust than the Dalian cavalry. You need to be trying to stay a little bit more mobile with Dalian cav, and that's not what happened here. Ironfoot Wargoats are still here. I mean, that was a fairly decent charge there. The Ironfoot Wargoats weren't quite prepared for that, and the charge bonus on the Dalian cavalry is good, but they're going to pay the ultimate price for that. They're at the very least going to rout, I would imagine, with the halberdiers right there, and indeed they do. The dwarves not quite ready to launch a full-blooded assault on this side just yet. Elves of Dale moving in. This is why, again, the Dalian cavalry would have been better at this job now, charging into the infantry, than the Earls are. So I think they got the use of their cavalry a little bit backwards here. But at the very least, they are breaking up the dwarven advance just a little bit. Ironfoot warriors moving in. They're actually going to block the charge of the Axe Guard of Erebor, which are by far the most dangerous unit of infantry the dwarves have outside of bodyguard units. The Earls are moving forward to try and wrap around that dwarven front line. Again, the Barding herd need to be supported more directly by the Dalian spears now that the dwarves are coming forward. There goes a dwarven general. It's a member of that Highborns unit back here, so they were really exposed back here. There's not many kills, but the general himself was cut down in that affair, lagging behind the rest of his unit. Fortuitous for Dale, but they need a break with their cavalry, and that's exactly what they've got. Not quite sure about the use of these Ironfoot Wargoats here, but Earls of Dale trying to block this dwarven advance. They'll struggle against the Highborns of Erebor, especially when they've got this much support around them, and now they're also getting hit in the side, but this isn't the worst thing for Dale. Barding herd are over there. There's also the missile units, the Lake Town infantry, continuing to shoot. Not the most damaging arrows in the world, especially when you consider the resilience of the dwarves, but the dwarves are not in the best shape positionally, and that can make the difference. That little bit of extra ranged pressure can start to tell. Meanwhile, these Ironfoot Wargoats mopping up the last of the Dalian cavalry, the Flame of Arnold flanking around, and they're wide open here, Dale. They have to commit fully to the front lines, otherwise they will start to bend. Problem is, though, they've left a huge gap in their front line as a result. The lumbermen have joined the front line now, adding a little bit of armour-piercing bite, and so far the Dalian lines are holding. You can see, though, where units of higher quality are being added, the Axe Guard, things are a little bit less clear-cut, as we continue to see that unit of cavalry in the background as we work down the line. But the Barding herd at the centre of this Dalian effort, doing very well thus far. Don't know what that unit of cavalry is going to go after. These Ironfoot Wargoats continuing to charge in and out of the Lake Town infantry. They're so depleted, though, that the Lake Town infantry actually withstanding those charges quite nicely. Interesting to see if they can manage that indefinitely. Ironfoot Wargoats, Dalian Spearmen trying to turn around, but it's a very depleted unit. They might interrupt the charge. They kind of did. The lumbermen are now going to turn around as well, having not taken the charge. The armour piercing from those axes is the sort of thing those Wargoats will want to avoid, so they're going to cycle out, but the problem is those lumbermen are sorely needed on the front line. Every able-bodied fighter is needed. And there's such a... Again, the Bardian marksmen are going to take a pretty nasty charge here. The Ironfoot Wargoats are pretty slow as far as cavalry goes, though, but they are going to charge nicely into the Bardian marksmen, try and take away Dale's surprisingly small amount of ranged resistance. Lumberman over here, let's go and see. This front line was a little bit less widespread, it was much more concentrated, and as a result they've done really well in the areas where they have committed the dwarves, and that is a problem. I mean, there were two armies over here, to be fair. The Earls being swept aside now. combination of all of those Ironfoot units with the Highborns at their centre. A general's unit of Highborns. You can see the other general over there with his red cape mounted, but yeah, this is a problem. There's a huge cluster of dwarves, which I don't know if Dale are going to be able to stop at this point. Barding Herd are trying to move forward, trying to set up a secondary line. Earls of Dale getting in the way, but the only thing they're going to find here is the end of a Dwarven Halder. And back over there, Dalian Royal Guard trying to move around. Those Ironfoot Wargoats have got Dale trying to move these units around just a little bit more now. And the cycle charging is starting to take a bit of a toll on these late town infantrymen. It's not flattening them in the way that a full strength version of the cavalry unit would have, but still, more and more units having to be committed across there to shore things up. More Dalian spearmen being committed over here. Interestingly enough though, over here things have gone a little bit haywire. I think Dale are winning over here. There's a lot of routing Dalian units in addition to Dwarven units that are now no longer alive, and yeah, I think Dale are going to win over here. A lot of their lower tier units, like their lumbermen though, are starting to lose stomach for the fight. But if they can hold on over here and win, they can make it a one-front battle. This is going to be a real problem though. There goes another general. Dalian Paladins still very much an issue that the Dwarves will have to deal with somehow. The Axe Guard of Erebor outnumbered, but most certainly not outgunned in this fight. There's not enough of the Barding Herd left to form up enough of a formation to be too scary for them, and they'll carve their way through Lumbermen and Dalian Spearmen, but they are unsupported. There's not a great deal of help forthcoming. There's crossbows that are still firing. Yeah, the Dalian line is actually holding up here. The Dwarves are maintaining the assault, but they aren't going to win, so they are going to be reliant on these forces over here. This unit of warriors getting way too deep into enemy territory. The Dalian Spearmen and the Lumbermen will finish them off for sure. It's over here where the Dwarves are at their strongest. Dalian Paladins 29, so they have taken a bit of damage. The Dalian Royal Guard starting to shoot into this Dwarven mass as well. There is the Dalian General that was in the Paladins. There's still very depleted units of cavalry just running all over the place over here, but they've done very well with a unit of very depleted cav here, has Ankles, because he has managed to mop up what would have otherwise been a very useful unit of late town infantry that still had a bit of ammunition left. Charging in again, making the most of what they have back here, running interference in the back lines, Bardian marksmen trying to wriggle free. They still have those units. That Dalian Royal Guard still going to be a concern for the Dwarves in melee as well. As we saw, the Dwarves only had one truly outstanding infantry unit, so again, very atypical armies this from both sides. Dale without a huge mass of archers, the Dwarves with only a single unit of bodyguard tier infantry. Maybe not what we're used to seeing, but there's still the Highborns in there. Starting to get a little bit shaken though, and the battle does seem to be going in Dale's favour. Lumberman getting in and amongst these routing Dwarves, making sure that they won't return to the battle. Still a few Wargoats there, managing to clatter through some of the Lumbermen before falling by the wayside. That was a pretty effective charge though, the mass of the Dwarves really coming in clutch there for them. They'll need to continue to do so. Axe Guard of Erebor routing is a bad sign for the Dwarves, as I said. That armor piercing, really useful against the strongest of Dale's units, and yeah, over here, the Axe Guard, there's not enough of them ultimately, that's the problem. A few more reinforcements on the way from the side, Barding Herd. And they're just being overrun here by a mass of Lumbermen. 9-foot crossbows continuing to fire. Another unit of Axe Guard of Erebor over here going toe-to-toe with the Barding Herd. Based on the fact that they are bananaing around the Barding Herd a little bit, you would give the edge to the Dwarves in this situation, but it's not going to be a fight they escape from without casualties, and that may be a problem. They need this kind of unit to be in that other melee fight, otherwise they are going to continue to struggle. Still a little bit of cavalry around. Yeah, Dale are going to win over here. And it's looking like Dale are seizing control of the battlefield overall. Another charge. I mean, they've done really quite well with their really depleted cavalry units, the Dwarves, having won the cavalry engagement earlier on, but interestingly enough, they haven't been able, and maybe it comes down to how they set themselves up. Their attack over here was very condensed, which meant they were able to smash through the first defence, but they're very easy for Dale to then surround and ultimately destroy here. Still plenty of Barding Herd on the field as well. Lake Town Infantry. Is that the end of Flame of Arnold? Or is that one of his allies? It can't be Flame of Arnold because he's still got units on the field. Just about. There's still a few Ironfoot crossbows. The crossbows in the end did not prove to be the determining factor on this front line that I thought they would be. And maybe that's because they were shooting at the wrong targets. Maybe going after the Dalian archers was a bit of a mistake, a bit of a waste of time. And maybe instead they should have been going after what has proven to be a significant unit that I said would be on the field today, which is the Barding Herd. Get rid of them and Dale would have had to go toe-to-toe without a phalanx unit with Dwarven infantry, and that would have been much less to their tastes. As it has happened though, Dale's front lines for the most part have held firm, and even the ones that haven't, they've responded to the damage that has been done pretty quickly. I don't think there's anything left. Well, yeah, all of these dwarves are running for the hills, so the Dalian army that was going to be on the way to assist Mirkwood, they may not be in much shape to fight after this, but they have at least scored a pretty significant victory against the Dwarves, it's looking like, unless they can pull some units out from nowhere, out of the back pocket. The Earls charging in, depleted cavalry units giving the Dwarves a taste of their own medicine that they've been frequent users of in this battle. Still some Dalian spearmen back there. There is still some fighting going on over here. The lumbermen in great numbers who have not disgraced themselves today. It's quite a rare sight to see a lower end unit of shock infantry like this, outside of maybe the really numerous orcish ones who can incorporate that sort of thing into their army a little bit more easily. It's rare to see this kind of unit be genuinely effective, but they have been today, as they continue to try and carve their way through what remains of these dwarves back here. I don't believe there's much else. Is there something over there? There is another unit of cavalry, a fairly full unit of war goats, which perhaps should have been utilised earlier in this fight, if they could have been. There were opportunities to charge in, but that time has come and gone at this point. There's far too many spears and Barding Herd that will be alert to the situation, and they will not allow such things to transpire. Lake Town Infantry moving in. You can see the Dalian Royal Guard in there as well, pulling out their long swords. There are still some Axe Guard of Erebor, who will put up a decent fight, but as with a fair few of the engagements we've seen them be a part of so far in this battle, they've been outnumbered, which is weird for the attacking armies. The feeling that they've been outnumbered in a few moments in this fight, and it has proven to be perhaps a real determining factor in this fight. And there's obviously nothing's guaranteed, but I would be amazed if the Dwarves managed to come back from this point of the battle. Ironfoot spears are routing, all of those units are now routing, players admitting defeat. Just this one unit of Ironfoot wargoats who, to be fair, have mopped up the valiant lumberman over here. One of them still remains, and he's going to run away. Question remains now, what is there left? There goes Flame of Arnor's general, run through by a Dalian spear. The old unit model for the Swordmasters of Khan there, still in the game in some capacity. There we go. I mean, this is the sum total of the Dalian army. It's not massive, but it's not. I wasn't expecting Dale to do quite so well, but it goes to show that maybe I did underestimate the Dalian infantry corps that there are, and I don't know what's happening there with that frame rate. Very bizarre indeed. But I suppose it does go to show that when they aren't spending so much money on archers, they do have a decent set of infantry units that they can use, and in particular here, with a more defensive setup, that has proven to be a real difference maker. I mean, the time limit is about to expire, so I'm not entirely sure what the Dwarves are doing, unless they... It's possible that because the Dalian army was meant to be a Mirkwood reinforcing army, they need to reach a certain point on the map so that they're still making progress. Maybe such a point is over here, but that would explain why they're not trying to relentlessly chase down that single unit of Ironfoot wargoats, and why the Dwarves are not at least trying to make something happen here in the late game, even though the time limit is fast approaching. So it was indeed a very fast and violent battle that Dale has ultimately won in spirit. There's a single outrider moving forward, a single banner carrier waving the army forward after its excursions on the field today. I guess they are going to move down here. The path towards Mirkwood lies open to them. I think the time limit is going to expire. I mean, even if that's the case, these Ironfoot Wargoats should be standing in the way to try and stop them. So it's a little bit of a peculiar one. We may as well go up to times 6 speed. I wasn't expecting to use times 6 speed on a battle that's only 18k frames, but there you go. Again, a bit of a palate cleanser in the middle of all of these sieges that I very often do. And there you have it. I mean, it was an impressive performance from Dale, as I said. We'll see what got the kills for the Dwarves in the late game, but I would... Barding Herd and Lumberman, armour-piercing infantry for the Dwarves, I think, in their own ways, were extremely effective in this fight. Ironfoot Spears, who are broken and fighting to the death. The Dalians will finish them off. And that is going to be very much that. The Ironfoot Wargoats, are they going to charge downhill? Got an opportunity to pad their kill count a little bit if they want to against some depleted Lumbermen. And that's going to be it. Never seen this part of the map really with any units on it, because no one ever deploys down here, no one ever comes to this part of the map. It's only really the top of the map which we usually see. We have seen many a final stand all the way up here at the very summit of the Iron Hills that you can get to. At the very foot, something that we have not seen. So there's that, I suppose. But yeah, a pretty straightforward battle this. The Ironfoot Wargoats are now charging in. They've chosen now to be the moment where they do. I don't know how useful this army is going to be to Mirkwood. They're very depleted now. But at the very least, the Dwarves have been punished for their treachery. Dale probably heartbroken to learn of the Dwarves turning on the free peoples of Middle-earth and taking up with Sauron's old servants, the Easterlings of the people. The betrayal. But that is going to be that.
The shadows grow long, and we are neither the vanquisher or the vanquished.
But yeah, Dale won that fight. Regardless of how you look at it, they won the battle conventionally. They were obviously the superior force on the field today. And they also got their army down here, so if their goal was to reinforce Mirkwood, then it was. They're also technically the defenders because it's 2v3, so the Dwarves were unable to defeat them within the time limit. By every possible metric here, Dale conquered Erebor on the field today. But let's have a look at what did the damage for the forces of Erebor. So Toby Larone struggling a little bit more than his allies, which is somewhat interesting. Toby Larone's army, none of them breaking 100 kills. Ironfoot Wargoats did okay initially, but his infantry really did struggle. Perhaps that shouldn't be too much of a surprise given we saw what way the battle went on the side of the line that he was on. As for Ankles, his army, a few units did break 100, a few units broke 200 actually. His unit of Ironfoot crossbows did very well. The unit of Ironfoot Wargoats also very effective. We saw them feasting upon those Lake Town infantrymen. And his Ironfoot warriors as well. Maybe the Highborns of Erebor, considering the kind of battle that it was, underperformed just a little bit. Again, I would argue that both he and Toby Larone needed to be a little bit more spread out in their approach. They were very condensed, and that ultimately did end up working against them. Dale responded also very well to that, I have to say. And then the Flame of Arnor, 231 kills on Axguard of Erebor, so they may have been outnumbered, but they were certainly getting a lot of kills. Fair amount of them probably on Dalian Spearmen and Lumbermen, but still 231 kills on a battle, I should say, of this scale is still very very impressive. The other one, 129. His crossbows did well, so I mean, maybe I was a little bit harsh on the crossbows. Like, it's a little bit difficult to keep track of crossbows and archers and the like unless you're really focusing on them throughout a battle. 172 kills isn't bad, but considering the damage crossbows can do to front lines, you would expect more damage to have been done. Again, I feel as though focusing on the infantry rather than the support units in behind was probably the way to go for the Dwarves. They would have taken more damage on those crossbows, but they maybe wouldn't have been at the mercy of that Dalian phalanx and the really solid defensive line that they ended up having. Because if you can expose stuff like the Lumbermen individually, they're not going to be able to stand up. They're much more of supporting tool, a bit of an armour-piercing bite to an otherwise very defensive Dalian force. I mean, the dismounted Earls really struggled in this fight because they were used more as sacrificial pawns, but the rest of the Dalian infantry units did very well and all did their jobs very effectively. So there we have it. Dale have managed to successfully defeat their former allies, the Dwarves, and that will bring us on to the final battle in this episodic series, which I already know what map it takes place on, bit of an iconic one as well. So I do hope you'll join me for the conclusion of this little 3-part story. Big thank you to the Flame of Arnor for allowing me to show it off as well. As for other things that are going to be coming up next, I have been given a scenario by Morris, so that's something to keep an eye on in the coming days. And also, by the time this replay comes out, it'll probably be only a week to 2 weeks perhaps before we start seeing a little bit of Rise of Mordor content on the channel, so also keep an eye out for that. So yeah, big thank you to the players and Flame of Arnor once again. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.